And one of the things that he spoke about was for young people in 2025. There's a real sense of uncertainty. It's a weakness, really. Even while there's strong community ties, there's a feeling that they can, to a degree, direct their own future. They're genuinely concerned about misinformation and not knowing what to trust or who to trust. So even if you're not reading between the lines, it looks a little bit like they're seeing cautionary tales almost of people going into groups that maybe they know they don't want to be into.
Yeah.
But they know it's a slippery slope.
Yeah. And again, that's a really, really valid point, because it's reinforcing a trend that you see where there's really not much out there in terms of a positive outlook for the future.
Yeah.
And if you're already facing an uncertain present, you want some certainty, especially if you think there's going to be an uncertain future. Hence why some of these groups can be very attractive to young men and so on, who find themselves socially disenfranchised, socially marginalised and so on, that they seek a sense of belonging.
And they do speak with certainty as well. It's one of those things where I think maybe in the past, because we had effectively, a few really credible, well-known sources of information, those have been drowned out really by a pretty democratic social media environment, made probably a bit more changeable. But that has led to a sense that there's nothing that's reliable, right? And if you're getting uncertainty in the world, and then you're not, all the information you're getting is telling you to be uncertain, whoever has the strongest voice of certainty kind of wins, right? And there is behavioral science and psychological evidence to say that's a common effect, right? That whoever speaks loudest and most confidently ends up getting support, even if they're wrong. Because they just sound right.
It's that sense of reassurance.
Yeah.
And just in terms of how they sound right, would you say that there are certain methods? I mean, it's quite difficult, this, because on one hand I want you to go into what they are, but on the other hand that kind of gives people a good way of knowing what they are, if that makes sense. The bad actors. But are there certain types of language, visual and audio language, that these groups use in order to attract these young?
An interesting point. What we are finding, again, it comes back to the sense of reassurance and certainty. There's certainly an approach which harks back to a romantic idea of the past, that to bring that sense of what they would describe as community spirit in a very socially constructed sort of way that they've constructed themselves. This sense of togetherness through their eyes, and so on. This sense of harking back, as I say, to a romantic idea of the past that never really existed. But it's a very much closed idea of the past in that sense. But a much more, they say, certain idea of the past. Even in terms of faith, we are seeing evidence, even for example here in Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, a certain movement back towards faith, because it provides that sense of reassurance and certainty in, again, an uncertain world. This in itself could cause problems for faith leaders, because they will see a rise in attendances and so on in churches and faith-based organisations. But why is that the case? So there could be that sense of right, numbers are increasing, but why? So there's important debates to be had and discussions to be had right across a number of social platforms, networks, community networks, faith-based networks, and so on. There's so much more here that needs to be looked into. It's fascinating, but also rather scary at the same time.
Well, absolutely. But I was just wondering as well. I mean, I suppose this is almost a rhetorical question, but the very nature of social media means that those voices that are the most amplified are often the loudest in terms of either the wildest or the shoutiest or whatever. Yeah. So even if they then go back to faith, I assume the faith that they're going back to is a largely much more hardline version of that faith than it would be otherwise.
Much more.
I can imagine it's quite orthodox.
Much more traditional type. Again, much more traditional, because it feeds into that sense of seeking reassurance and clarity and some degree of certainty in an uncertain.